Chapter 17, The Man in the Horn-Rimmed Glasses. Mark and I found ourselves so busy in the investigation that at one point we almost forgot about Loy. Our thrust was mainly toward identifying Loy's superiors. Besides, Loy and Mary had no phone, and we were limited to communication by mail. We were sure that Loy would be excited by what we were discovering. But before we had a chance to tell him about the direction our research was taking, I received a note with a simple message from Loy. Dear Mark Collum and Glen Sample, I am writing to ask for cancellation of procedure of the writing of this book. At the present, have problems needing attention. Thanks anyway for your good efforts on this work. Sincerely, Loy Factor. What do we do now? I asked Mark. I had immediately telephoned him with the bad news. Just as before, while at the hospital, when he had refused to resume his conversation with Mark and Larry, fear had again silenced Loy Factor. We were not going to be dissuaded in our research, however, as the scope of our investigation had grown much larger than Loy Factor. We discovered someone far more important. We'd found Malcolm Wallace. Let's try what we did before. Let's write him a letter and try to convince him that he needs to continue to cooperate, was Mark's suggestion. I agreed that it was worth a try, and so I composed a letter urging Loy to continue doing what he had promised he would do, telling the truth. I enumerated the many things that we had found verifying his story. I told him that the world deserved to hear the truth that only he has been willing to tell. I commended him for his bravery thus far in helping us find the real killers of President Kennedy. But at the same time, I told him that we would not and could not stop what we had begun. I sent the letter, hoping for a favorable reply from Loy. We wanted, if nothing else, to show him photographs of Malcolm Wallace, but not by mail. We wanted to see the expression on Loy's face. What we needed, at the very least, was one more visit with Loy. In the meantime, there was work to be done. One task that I was particularly interested in was trying to find personal friends and fellow workers of Wallace. Ling Electronics, the company that Wallace worked in from 1961 until 1969, was located in Southern California, just a few miles from my home. I phoned the personnel department and asked if there was anyone in the company that would remember Mr. Wallace, even though it had been over 25 years since his employment. I was referred to a longtime employee, Joe Bloomberg, who had actually worked under Wallace for many years. I didn't tell Joe that I was working on a book about the Kennedy assassination, a subject that tends to close more doors than it opens. Instead, I told him, and truthfully so, that I was researching a book that deals with crimes that have been committed to protect government officials. I explained that Malcolm Wallace was simply one of the characters in our book and asked him if he could shed some light on the man that he had worked side by side with for nearly 9 years. He graciously agreed. My interview with Joe Bloomberg took place at Ling Electronics in Anaheim, California. He gave me a tour of the facility, which manufactures devices that vibrate various types of electronic circuitry, simulating the harsh conditions that these components would encounter in missiles or jet aircraft. I wanted to know what kind of person Wallace was. How did others view him? Joe was able to verify that Wallace appeared to have a problem with alcohol. He explained that the company had put up with Wallace's drinking for a long time. He described a serious automobile accident on a nearby freeway that nearly cost him his life. But I always liked him. Everyone did. He was very intelligent and performed his job quite well. Then I asked about his security clearance. Well, that was one thing that was kind of strange, Bloomberg recalled. You see, we worked in the contracts department, and Mac was my boss, but he didn't have the clearance necessary to read some of the paperwork, so I would have to do it. Odd indeed, I thought, for a company to hire a convicted murderer, which a few of the company were well aware of, who was also an alcoholic and had been recently stripped of the security clearance necessary for him to properly perform his job. Something else I learned about Wallace was consistent in the observations of everyone who knew him, and that is, no one knew him. Not one person could describe his wife or even her name. No one knew how many children he had. He never talked about himself, his life, his politics, and never mentioned his relationship with Lyndon Johnson. Hence, when it was later learned, after he had left the company in 1969, that Wallace had been convicted of murder and was connected with Lyndon Johnson, no one could believe it. Malcolm Wallace was an enigma. I asked about his absences from work. Other than absences that were ostensibly from his heavy drinking, Wallace occasionally traveled to Texas, where his family resided, and where the parent company headquarters were located. He was sent on other projects as well, the construction of a particle beam accelerator at Stanford University, for example, a strange project to be involved in for someone without a security clearance. Joe had, at my request, looked through his assortment of old company photographs, thinking that he surely had a good photo or two of Wallace, but strangely, all he was able to find was a single photograph showing Wallace standing far off in the distance. Only two things could be learned from that photograph. He had gained a little weight compared with our photographs of a younger Wallace, and he was wearing horn-rimmed glasses. The photograph was taken sometime around 1963. This seemingly insignificant fact might not register with someone who has never studied the Kennedy assassination, but I instantly recognized it as another small piece of evidence linking Wallace to the assassination. Why? A Dealey Plaza witness to the assassination, Richard R. Carr, reported to police and officials that he had seen a heavy-set man in a tan jacket and wearing horn-rimmed glasses standing in one of the sixth-floor windows of the schoolbook depository building a minute or so before the assassination. A few minutes later, Carr said the same man was seen hurriedly walking away from the building. Carolyn Walters also saw what she described as a brown-coated man standing next to another man with a rifle. She was not certain which of the upper floors of the depository she observed them on. James Worrell, Jr. said he saw a man in a suit coat exit swiftly out the rear door of the depository shortly after the shooting. All of our earlier photographs of Wallace, taken in his university days, show him wearing wire-framed glasses. But the Ling photograph clearly shows that Wallace had changed his style of glasses. Going back to the 1961 murder of Henry Marshall, a composite drawing was made of the man seen by gas station operator Nolan Griffin. Griffin described to investigators a man wearing horn-rimmed glasses who stopped at his station a couple of days before the Marshall shooting, before Marshall was found dead, asking for directions to the Marshall place. This drawing was at first thought to be the likeness of Billy Saul Estes, who later implicated Mac Wallace as the murderer. At one critical point in our conversation, I broached the Kennedy assassination with Joe Bloomberg, asking if he remembered the reactions of his staff on that day. Joe described the shock that spread through the office, how the secretaries were crying, and so on. "We shut the whole place down, and everyone went home," Joe said. Then I asked if he remembered Malcolm Wallace's reaction to the shooting of the president, since Wallace worked in the same office as Bloomberg did. "I don't recall Mac being there that day," was Joe's casual reply. But Joe was not the only person close to Malcolm Wallace who did not know his whereabouts on November 22nd. Neither did his wife. I must credit the late Austin researcher Jay Harrison for helping me find the former Virginia Ledgerwood, ex-wife of Malcolm Wallace, not more than 15 miles from my home in Southern California. I had tried many times to get an interview with Virginia, now remarried. When I finally got a terse phone call from her one evening, I sensed that she was not terribly pleased to discuss the subject of Wallace, and was generally interested in getting it over with so I would stop writing her. She explained that the two of them were married in 1963, a hasty arrangement motivated by an unplanned pregnancy. On the day of the Kennedy assassination, she vividly remembers that she and Malcolm Wallace had already separated, and she was at the home of her mother with their newborn daughter. She had no contact with him and does not know where Mac was on the fateful day of the assassination. She did tell me that Malcolm once discussed with her his friendship with Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, although most of his former history remained a mystery to her. Malcolm was, to say at the least, a quiet man.